Hello, and welcome to another episode of Expert Talks, powered by InnoVint. I am your host, Lauren Heindel, and today I'm joined by Kyle Altomare, the winemaker at Gloria Ferrer. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks for having me, Lauren. Really excited to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about sparkling wine and blending and everything that led you here today. So let's start there. Can you talk
Yeah,
a little bit about your story and kind of how you ended up here at Gloria Ferrer?
yes, my story is kind of I back-ended my way into the wine industry and I back-ended my way into sparkling. And now subsequently, I make enough of it and drink enough of it. My blood is carbonated, which is a fun fact. But I originally was set on a path to be a teacher, and quickly realized that that wasn't really where I wanted to go. Really loved education, really loved the path that I was on, but just wanted to make a change early on, and fell into the wine industry. My wife and I were living up here, and it was just something that was always around. Wine was always around with my family. My dad was a chef, and he really taught me early on to kind of dissect flavor on a granular level. And he just made me obsessed with flavor. I started on the hospitality side of the industry, but once I got a chance to help with production, that was it. I was hooked. I was like, man, I get to smell this every day. I get to taste this every day. I get to look at this stuff every day. I get to be physical. I get to be outside. It was just this kind of culmination of everything that scratched every part of my being, and really just kind of morphed my brain in a different way. So I came to this industry kind of by happenstance. And once I fell into it, I was like, there's nothing else I ever want to do. This is it. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And 15 years ago, if you asked me if I'd be making wine and living in wine country, I would have said absolutely not. You're crazy. That's not on my bingo card. So turns out it was the free space right in the center, so that was the easy part, right? So after getting a chance to start it, I just started from the ground up. I started helping out during harvest, hauling hoses, cleaning tanks. Took a job at a very small winery with just me and the winemaker, and is, a man named John Kelly, and he kind of pulled me under his wing and said, "So you want to know what it's like to run a winery?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to know everything." And it was really, really a cool experience. We were only making about 5,000 cases. It was small production, but getting to do everything from vineyard to tasting room to wine club to administration, mailing lists, everything I could see. And I really had a calling to get into production full time. So that's where I realized kind of the limitations of being a two-man operation. It was a good transition for me to move back over to the Napa side where we were living, and kind of just work my way up through the cellar into the lab at various different places like Clos Pegase and then Charles Krug. And from there, really set my sights on winemaking. After working with the team over at Charles Krug and working under Stacy Clark for a number of years, it was just really, really nice. She taught me, Charles Krug was this beautiful place, very generous family. The Madamis are very generous people, and bigger production, and really learned everything there was to know about getting your street credit for winemaking. And from there, I moved over to start making sparkling over at Artesa. And once I got to make sparkling, the door was open, and I was ready to walk right through it. Now that I got the itch, I loved making sparkling through the fact that I love drinking it. And I was like, well, if I love drinking it, I should learn how to make it. And then from there, it taught me such a technical side of winemaking that really just it spoke to me on kind of a primal level, because just as my dad had taught me to dissect flavors on a granular level, sparkling is very, very meticulous in terms of timing and blending and everything that goes into it. So set my sights on making sparkling full time. And that's how I ended up here at Gloria Ferrer.
That's awesome. You're already going through some of the questions I had for you. So I'll just dive a little bit deeper along the lines of what's sort of the most technically challenging part of making sparkling wine versus making still wine from your point of view?
That's a really, really good question. When I was learning to make sparkling wine, it is such a technical beast that I had to kind of flip my brain upside down. And the way you approach still wine has to be very different than the way you approach sparkling wine.
Yeah.
With still wine, you're doing all your work in the vineyard and all your work in fermentation, and then you age the wine first, and bottling is the culmination of that product, right? And then when you put that cork in the bottle as a still wine production, hey, it's up to the consumer where on that wine's life cycle. There's a curve to every wine, right? And that life cycle, our job as winemakers is to try and extend that curve for as long as possible, so that wherever a consumer chooses to pick up the wine on that curve, they're going to have an enjoyable experience. But once you put the cork in the bottle with still wine, you're done. It's really out of your hands. And with sparkling, that's really only the first kind of jumping off point. So the technicalities come from the fact that when you're blending, you're working with inherently unbalanced wines. We're picking so early in the season. We're working with acid levels that would really it does make my dentist upset. He questions my career choices every time. Every 6 months I go in for a cleaning, he questions if there's anything else I'm going to do. And I'm like, no, that's what I pay you for.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and take my teeth out of my head. You're going to keep them in there. That's what the job is. So you're working with things that, acid's so high that your enamel is melting off your teeth. Inherently, these wines are not complete because they're exhibiting only certain portions. Pinot Noir likes to get ripe really, really early. It exemplifies the vintage and the site that it's grown very well. Chardonnay tends to take on a little bit more of what you do with it, but still they're not 100% complete wines. Very, very rarely. Now, some vintages and some vineyards can produce that for sparkling wine, but if you think back to like the 100 point wine that was here just before Roederer got 100 points a couple of years ago, it was Krug, right? And the blend that went into making up that wine was 174 different base wines from 47 different vintages,
Oh my
right? So you're
God.
talking a very different game, right? So you kind of
Yeah.
have to think about the fact, and that's what I've really tried to encompass here at Gloria Ferrer is we keep every vineyard block separate. And whereas still wines, you're kind of like, hey, I can move things around and we'll blend a little early, and you blend before you get it to bottle, and maybe you age things separate, but halfway through you can rack them and put them together. But with sparkling, what we do is I keep every block of the vineyard separate, and that allows us to evaluate it through a process that is an objective process, because we're looking for characteristics that you never look at a single wine in a vacuum, right? Now, this wine on its own may be very lush and aromatics are a little bit subdued and it's kind of quiet and shy, but you put that with something that has a little bit more of an austere mouthfeel and higher toned aromatics, right? And you get these wines that kind of meld together and they blend together really well. It's what drew me to sparkling wine was the assemblage, working with so many different components that the sum is always greater than any of its individual parts. And that's the beautiful thing, right? Is the beauty, I call it the intentional balancing through unbalanced things, right? You take a bunch of unbalanced things and think of it as a scale. If you've got this scale and a single wine may be tipped where the acid's a little too high and it has no mid palate, or it has no short finish, or it pulls a little forward. And you threw another wine that on its own is kind of over here where the finish is really long, but it's got this hole in the mid palate, right? You put them together in certain percentages and it's our job to find that percentage, but you create something that neither of those wines could do on its own. And that is kind of the challenge with sparkling wine and it's funny because, being in the valley, you can't throw a stone and not run into another winemaker. It's like, I mean, it's everywhere. At school drop off, there's like 15 of us, and it becomes more of a networking event than it does a kid's drop off. But
Yeah.
we'll often taste wines together, winemaking friends and I. And the first thing, I always love when we do this for the first time with friends is, I'm used to doing stuff with base wines every single day, and you taste it with other people that aren't ready, and it's this kind of like the shock and awe. And we actually have a wine club here too that does that as well, where we walk people through the process of making sparkling wine. It's called our Heritage Society, and it's always the thing that I brace people with. I'm like, be prepared. You're working with things that are going to shock you like lemon juice, and it's fun to watch their reactions, but the process is kind of backwards. I always say that you have to, if you enjoy Quentin Tarantino movies, you will enjoy making sparkling wine, because you have to start at the end and then you have to work back to the beginning. When we're thinking about making wine on the sparkling side, we're always thinking when we're blending, not just when is this wine going to be bottled, it's how long is that wine going to sit in the bottle before we disgorge, because that's a stylistic choice as well.
Mhm.
And all of those things have implications. So you can't really make a sparkling wine until you go all the way to the end of the process, in your head at least. I always say that you make sparkling wine in your head far before you make it in the cellar. And that comes from meticulous planning, right? Because A blend that is going to age in tirage for, let's say, 10 years is going to be a very different base wine and a very different varietal composition than something that's going to age in tirage for 1 year.
Yeah.
And a rosé is going to be very, very different than a blanc de blanc, not only varietally, composition wise, but also how you make them, what you want them to show. The goal on the sparkling side, being that it is so technical, is just to allow the avenue of those personalities of the wines to shine, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I have a question about oak and kind of your use with oak in sparkling. Do you think that it adds complexity, or do you think that the risk kind of overshadows some freshness? How do you use oak, and what are your thoughts around that?
I love that question, Lauren, because it is so deep. My view for oak with sparkling is that it needs to add framing, it needs to add structure, but it can't be overpowering or overshadowing. Now, that again is not in a vacuum. That might mean that one barrel in there is overpowering and overshadowing. But in the grand scheme of things, if you put that in a blend at, let's say, 0.5%, 1/4%, 1%, does it then fall into balance? And if the answer is yes, then we use it. So I'm always refining the coopers that we work with, or even the toasts that we do.
Yeah.
The oak program, when I brought it on here at Gloria Ferrer, because it wasn't started traditionally. Gloria Ferrer had been no oak, no ML. On the sparkling wines, everything was put together in the same fashion, and we kind of flipped that on its head when we changed the winemaking style here and said, like, if we're making so many different sparkling wines, and our goal is to make really world class wines here, not everything can be the exact same.
Along the lines of blending, it's known as the heart of sparkling winemaking, right? That's where you can make these products that shine. So when you're tasting these different base wines, like you were mentioning before, some of them are super acidic and some of them maybe have a hole here or there. What are you looking for structurally? And, is it like acidity, texture, aromatics, the length, the finish? How do you kind of lay that out? And what's your process? Like, walk us through your process there.
That's a really, really good question. I love that you hit on all these things that we just talked about. And that's the point of our grading tasting at Gloria Ferrer. So we sit down as a team and we do this double blind. Every lot is tasted double blind and we keep them all separate. So not even I know where they fall in tasting. Tasting and blending is a very subjective thing, right? Everybody tastes differently. You and I can sit down and taste the same base wine, and I make a, oh my God, I love that. That's amazing. It's got length, it's got this plush texture. The aromatics are amazing. And you're like, I really don't like it. Are we tasting the same wine? And you kind of start to self-doubt, right? So we had to put kind of an objective lens on something that is very subjective. Things that we look for are an A-grade wine should have weight. It should feel more like olive oil on your palate rather than water, right? There's wines that you taste sometimes where you're like, man, I love the aromatics. I love the fruit. I love the acidity, but did someone forget to put alcohol in this? Like, where's the weight? Right. And
Uh-huh.
so that's one of the weight is probably the number one qualifier that I look for, right? Because especially with sparkling wine, yeah, the temptation is to lean into the aromatic side of the wines. And with still wines, that's really something that you think about incessantly, where aromatics draw you in. That aromatic tension that's there is something that you strive for and look for. It's always hard to break that thought process with sparkling wine blending because those aromatics and the precursors and the compounds that are there, we have another fermentation to go through. So it's going to change the total matrix of the wine completely once we go through that secondary fermentation. So while aromatic intensity and aromatic complexity is high on the list for me, you need it to be in balance. So I would say the top three things that I look for with sparkling wine: weight, length of finish, and purity of acidity, right? We're
Okay.
working with an elevated acid profile. That's just by design. Now, the acids that make up that profile really are what drive your feeling. And sparkling wine for me is more of a textural component blending than it is an aromatic and fruit component blending. Because I mentioned we're going to go through fermentation again. Those flavors are going to shift.
Yeah.
Those aromatics, they're going to shift. Will they maintain the same semblance? Yes. What I mean by that is if you put something that has no fruit or nothing, no aromatic intensity in the bottle, you're not going to gain that going through secondary fermentation.
Hmm.
Now, if you put something that is aromatically intense and aromatically complex, it's going to continue to evolve. So you have to have this kind of melding of things, but really what we strive for is the textural side of wine. How does it feel when you put it on your palate? How long is the finish? Does the acid profile feel so clean and so crisp that it makes you want to come back for a second sip, right? So what we're focusing on in sparkling wine is, again, trying to make sure that the wine hits every part of your palate and then marry the flavors on top of it. And that's how you create your blend. But start texturally, then focus on your aromatics and your flavors and put them all together so that they feel balanced.
That's so good. Do you blend for consistency year over year, or do you lean on each vintage to kind of express its uniqueness and like showcase what that year had to offer?
You just hit the nail on the head. There's a number of different ways you can come at this. And we do both. So it totally depends on what the wine that we're working on is. Something like our Tête de Cuvée, which is our Carneros Cuvée, that needs to be vintage driven. That needs to be vineyard driven. We're trying to showcase the place and the time that that wine was made. Um, Now, something like our non-vintage Blanc de Blanc that you find in the marketplace, that needs to be consistent.
Love.
They're the introduction to Gloria Ferrer. Hey, we have three wines, and this is what we do. Three different styles, but those styles need to be in parallel and the same year over year. Those two types of blending for vintage-driven cuvées and for consistency-driven cuvées, the house style, if you will, they are two different skill sets, and that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, you have more liberties to take with the vintage blended cuvées. The vintage driven blending gives you a lot more leeway to create something that it has a personality. And the blending for consistency is where the real technical skill set comes in, right? Because it's like there may be a wine that is more expressive on the table that you just are drawn to, but is it what we're trying to do? So is that the goal? Having that goal in mind before you sit down at the blending table is important. And that's why we do the grading tasting as well. So that when we sit down at the table, when we have 90 different components, you're only bringing the components that are right for the job. You're only picking up the tool that is right for the job. That makes your job a lot more focused and a lot more fun.
That's a perfect transition to my next question. I'm interested for you, you've been doing this for a while. When does it happen where blending starts to become more intuitive and you can kind of just trust your palate and trust your experience rather than more analytical and leaning into the data and having to really just make sure you're hitting those percentages because you did them before?
I'll let you know when I get there. Haven't hit that spot yet. Because I said I always like to learn. And the
Yeah.
more I learn, then I'm like, man, the less I actually know about this. I think it's very, very hard when you're dealing with sparkling wine. I mentioned before, our feedback loop is so much slower and it's sometimes hard. We'll taste these wines and I always love to bring them home for my wife to taste as well. And she's got a really good palate and probably better than mine. I'm like, hey, you got to taste this. She's like, oh my God, this is so amazing. When do I get to taste it? I'm like, 8 years. She's like, why are you doing, what are you doing? Bring me something. So anyways, I think that the intuitiveness, for me was always there. It actually took somebody to kind of tease that out of me a little bit. And it was, a woman that I worked with, previously. Her name was Anna Diego Draper. And we had this really great working relationship. She was amazing to work with. And I never forget what she said. And she's like, your only problem in winemaking is that you don't trust your gut. You're getting in your own way. She's like, you're the only person standing in your own way. I came at this from such a technical, and it was right off of coming off of Charles Krug. Big, big blends. We're talking millions of cases a year. Consistency was the thing, and technical was the thing. And she really broke that shell. She told me that it was okay to trust your gut, right? So, in terms of, when does it become intuitive? I think that it gets the base. What we do is when we put together the first look at these wines, that initial blend, that gets easier the longer you do it. The final tweaks and these final little percentages, I don't think they ever get easier if you're doing your job right. Because for
Yeah.
me, it's always about constant pursuit of not perfection, but continuously getting better.
So let's talk a little bit about how you use InnoVint AI. You were part of our beta participants, and I know you were one of the first people to use the InnoVint AI analysis import, the AI voice to text work order creation, and now the AI custom reporting voice to text. So all of those are new
Yep.
AI features that we just rolled out in the InnoVint platform natively. And yeah, I'd love to hear how you were using those this past harvest.
AI, I think, is a superiorly powerful tool. We just talked about the fact that I've always been data driven. I've always been technical. It's what really scratches my analytical side of my brain for blending these wines. Um, but that required a lot of time. It required a lot of
Yeah.
data, sifting through data. And the more data you can have as a winemaker, the better decision you're going to make. It's never going to make the decision for you. You're just going to make more informed and better decisions.
Hmm.
And AI has been extremely helpful in that because what I view AI's real strength right now is its ability to sift through large swaths of data, far larger than I could ever imagine to do on my own or with a team. When you're talking about a harvest that's 3 weeks long, any hiccup in getting data to you or understanding data, it can clog up the things down the road. During peak harvest, we'll have 150, 180 ferments rolling at a time. And
Yeah.
it's like you got to make individual decisions on those 150, 180 ferments. And each one of them is individual and each one of them is different. And each one of them is just as important as the next one. If there's any lapse in getting you the data, you're working at a disadvantage. So,
Yeah.
we really tested the image import of how do we get this data in. If we can have somebody that even myself is probably the worst culprit, the worst handwriting in the world, and this system can pick it up and actually decipher it, the information flowing to me is much better because instead of our team spending time generating the data, they're spending time auditing the data, which means
Yeah.
that whole gap of I look at it innately, I know, geez, Louise, that's not the right one. But their brain isn't there because they're working on the other 179 firms we have. What we've done is take away the generation point of it, which let's be honest, was from a cost perspective, very expensive to have people do. And
Yeah.
we've shifted it to now I have somebody auditing the data that is generated. It's another level of quality control between me. Now the conversations that we're having as a team, they're different. My team
Mhm.
isn't coming to me anymore, just handing me a bricks and temp sheet saying, here it is. They're saying, Kyle, you need to go check tank 4. This
Wow.
curve doesn't make any sense. Or do you want to make any adjustments? Curve makes sense. We double checked it. We triple checked it. Do you want to make any adjustments? That's how you're making better wine, right? You have people giving you a multitude of information. And it's about, I think AI has put the power back in our team. Instead of spending time generating things, we're having different discussions about this. And that means our whole team has taken a step function up in terms of knowledge. And the conversations we're having are very different. And it's even
Incredible.
down to things like voice to text.
Yeah.
It's super helpful walking through the cellar and being like, for instance, I love to use oxygen at certain times in the fermentation to help build cell wall of the yeast, right? And if I'm walking through and I have to make notes and I have to stop and I stop my train of thought, instead I'm tasting through these ferments and I can just write a work order right there on the spot. The seller hates it because they have 20 times more work now
Yeah.
because it doesn't take any time to go upstairs and type it. The flow of work is much more seamless than it has been in the past, which is just what I view AI as is removing the barriers of the legwork. It's never
Mhm.
going to replace qualified team members.
No.
It's going to make your team members infinitely more effective.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Kyle. I love hearing how you've been really just bullish on these new AI features and just adapting them and running with them and giving us feedback in real time. It's been so helpful to make sure that these products are valuable and you can use them and you want to use them. So if people want to learn more or if they want to connect with you to chat about sparkling wine or learn more about Gloria Ferrer, how can they get in contact?
Yeah, our website is the best way, gloriaferrer.com. We have a great team there that'll filter any question you want over to me. You can also follow us along on Instagram. And then we have a YouTube series that if you have any interest in sparkling wine, we have a 7-hour masterclass that starts very broad spectrum and goes all the way into the nitty gritty. And that's on our YouTube channel as well. It's just Gloria Ferrer on YouTube. And there's a 7-hour masterclass. They're broken into 1-hour segments that you could find everything you could possibly ever want to know about sparkling wine on there as well.
That's so awesome, Kyle. I'm actually going to post that on the punch down. So for everyone in the punch down who wants to,
Fantastic.
yeah, who wants to do that masterclass, I'll send a link over. Thank you again, Kyle, for your time and your expertise on Expert Talks. I'm Lauren Heindel with InnoVint, and I love to sit down with people like you to chat about what you do in the wine industry.
Thanks for giving us the platform to do so, Lauren. This was really enjoyable.
Awesome. Well, until next time, cheers.
Take care.